So, according to the robots who govern YouTube, this video is a bad idea. Unlike the most popular video on YouTube, which was apparently a great idea. Thank you, robots. If you are my gift horse, I may not think much of your AI-generated mouth, but I intended to make bank on the fertilizer. Nevertheless, as a fan of boosting the signals of storytelling models that are lesser known among my peers, and who keeps running into hero's journey evangelists who insist their gospel is the only one worth sharing, I would like to point out that there are in fact 4 generally accepted gospels, and I would be doing something stupid if I did not at least attempt to use the androgynous sounds of my voice to share and through the process of sharing perhaps better understand Kishotenketsu, an incredibly prevalent storytelling method from East Asia that started in China as a minimalistic poetry style, then migrated from China to Korea and Korea to Japan, where it was put to work and made responsible for everything from basic sentence structure to game design to high-dollar blockbusters. As far as the basic storytelling model is concerned, the easiest way I can think of to explain Kishotenketsu to myself as a Westerner is by contrasting it with a phenomenon almost as ubiquitous as the monomyth called Story Mountain. If this is not the first source you have consulted on storytelling, you may already be aware that the conquest of Story Mountain requires 5 things: beginning, build-up, problem, resolution, and end. At first glance, the 4 requirements for scaling Mount Kishotenketsu, introduction, development, twist, and resolution, differ only slightly from those of Story Mountain. They even follow a comfortably linear pattern. But a given character and his storyteller do not so much as conquer Mount Kishotenketsu, as much as they make the climb, encounter an avalanche-sized difficulty, decide how they are going to respond to that difficulty, and as often as not, prepare to climb the next mountain in the Kishotenketsu range. This method of storytelling is sometimes understandably mislabeled the story without conflict or slice-of-life model, and granted, it can be both those things, as artfully shown in My Neighbor Totoro, The Secret World of Arrietty, aka The Borrowers, and Whisper of the Heart. Then again, in stories like Howl's Moving Castle, both the book and the movie incorporate a fair amount of conflict. Yet, unlike similar stories in the West that tended to get framed as though the conflict is the story, the conflict of Howl's Moving Castle is framed as far less important than the protagonist's reaction to it. Whether Wizard Howl avoids the powerful people who want to use him for questionable causes, or gets his heart right enough to finally be with Sophie, are fine questions to ask on Story Mountain. But questions better suited to the heights and abrupt drops of Mount Kishotenketsu might be, how does Sophie choose to carry on despite the physical maladies wrought by the Witch of the Waste? Or, how does Howl change as a result of getting his heart back and maybe growing a damn soul? Now, apart from being raised on hero stories as though they were mother's milk, there are various reasons why folks in the Western Hemisphere might find Mount Kishotenketsu a challenge less intuitively met than that of Story Mountain. For one thing, a thing I have incidentally heard my publisher complain about from time to time, when specifically Americans think twist, they tend to think in terms of one-trick ponies, where once you know the twist, it is not necessarily worth revisiting that story. And I would be more inclined to challenge that assumption, were it not for a movie called Citizen Kane. With my own ears, I have heard 20th century college students who have watched Citizen Kane to humor a parent or a film studies professor or something glibly observe that, spoiler alert, Rosebud is a sled, then boast about how they checked out of the rest of the movie, wholeheartedly believing that was the twist. And like a cut-rate detective novel, once you learn the twist, the rest of the story is a waste. That is not so with well-told stories in general, and for anyone who thinks it is, I wouldn't rule out user error. But it is especially not true for Citizen Kane from a Kishotenketsu perspective, wherein Charlie Kane's twist and the heart of his story would be here. The part where his well-meaning, poverty-stricken parents send him off to a new life of unfathomable wealth without so much as talking to him first. The relatively long resolution thereafter is where Charlie, now Charles Foster Kane, spends the rest of his life playing rough with both money and people, because he was made to leave the toys he wanted behind, and with them his childhood. See, when storytellers accustomed to writing the 10 part of Kishotenketsu think twist, they don't mess around with minor scandals or singular closeted skeletons. They think in terms of paradigm shifts. You got some perfectly nice siblings under stress from a sick mommy in a recent move? Great! Let's see what they do when they meet a giant flying cat monster. Hell, give them 2, 1 for each sister. You got a mostly contented shy girl with a knack for making hats and limited people skills? Great. Let's cast an old age spell on her and watch her try to sort out her life in a walking castle governed by a smooth-talking douchebag. To anyone who thinks I just insulted their anime boyfriend, Howl of the Book is different in a bad way. I am certain the reason Mr. Miyazaki gave him all that beautiful blonde hair was to help absorb the excess douche. Moving right along, another thing about Kishotenketsu that could put the Story Mountain crowd out of their comfort zone is that when Story Mountaineers think of the word end, it is almost always in terms of satisfaction and tying up loose ends, if not in terms of outrageous happiness. When the Kishotenketsu crowd thinks of the word end, the only expectation is that the story stops. It is often not a happy ending or even a satisfying one. The story just ends, and you, as the complicit audience member, become part of the ketsu in Kishotenketsu, deciding how to react after everything you thought you knew about this fictional world gets turned upside down, then left in uncertainty about how to keep turning. The best example of this in Western media I can think of without looking anything up might be the season 1 finale of a show called The Good Place, which, look, I'm not the cuddliest of YouTubers, but I'm not a monster. I can name drop Rosebud because Citizen Kane is old AF, and if knowing what Rosebud is ruins the movie for you, you deserve to have ruined things. But if The Good Place happens to be on your to-do list, I won't be the one to spoil that for you. Anyway, so far so good, right? We have noted some perspective differences and stylistic changes, but no catastrophic divides between Western and Eastern storytelling. In fact, if Japanese animation and the better Westerns of old Hollywood teach us anything, it is that the abrupt twists and occasionally cryptic endings of Kishotenketsu can peacefully coexist with the heroics and stalwart optimism generally present in the West. The two can even meet each other for playdates, as is, for example, observable in Cowboy Bebop in the East, or The Magnificent Seven in the West. Right? Cool. So where's the twist? I asked myself while drafting my script for this video, and trying desperately to get my head around Kishotenketsu, so I could share my thoughts without badly misrepresenting the concept as someone who did not grow up with it. And when I figured out what that twist was, I was not happy. For you see, if by chance you have visited this channel before, you may have noticed that it is a long-standing facet of my idiom to take snarky jabs at the hero's journey, and by association, the story mountain on which he resides whenever possible, because I find his story as defined by the monomyth to be woefully incomplete. And frankly, any hero worthy of his capital H should be able to take it. So imagine my disgust when I learned that the thematically significant twist of this video requires me to do something that pains and irritates me on a deeply personal level. I am going to say something nice about the capital H hero, without irony or qualifiers. And it has to do with something else that a smarter, better YouTuber called Calamus Press refers to in his video on this subject as determinism.
Determinism is the worldview that we don't bend the world to our will, rather the world bends us to its will. Characters in a story written from a deterministic framework are reactive and driven by the plot instead of proactively driving the plot.
That sounds pretty straightforward, yes? Well, if you grasp that entirely on your first try, you are doing better than I did. So as a courtesy to anyone who may be as slow on the uptake as I am, let's try to clarify this point by taking another look at Sophie from Howl's Moving Castle. Through the eyes of someone from a culture where even the non-hero-centered stories are prone to an emphasis on problem-solving and overcoming adversity, it is incredibly tempting to view the events at Market Shipping and the various backdrops against which the titular castle moves, in terms of the effect that Sophie has on the castle and everyone in it. But from an Eastern perspective, the castle, the witches, the wizards, the fire demons, and the aging spell are all things that happened to Sophie. And while it is well within the bounds of her particular character to grow from the experience and have a positive influence here and there, her job, the number one thing that is expected of her as a protagonist, is to accept what has happened to her as a series of cosmic jests, without quarrel or attempt to reestablish the status quo. That is a surprisingly tough idea to accept if you were raised to believe that your hero's job, and vicariously your job, was to triumph over evil and make a difference in the world. But that is not determinism. Determinism is the radical acceptance that the world and all its hardships are lots that have been cast on our characters by fate, and it is not productive for said characters to fight them. They can choose to react well or poorly when something unexpected rattles them. but that might realistically be their only option. A vast departure in attitude from fiction of the West, because Western protagonists, almost to a human, operate in terms of radical unacceptance. Not only do they expect to change the world, they often successfully catch the world as it crumbles and nail it back into place by story's end. So, is one superior to the other? Is it better for the characters through whom we vicariously move through fiction to act as though they can/should unfailingly change the world, or that the world will unfailingly change them, and neither the twain shall meet? Well, at the risk of sounding cliché, a theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr is credited with the writing of something called the Serenity Prayer, which is now a well-known fixture in Alcoholics Anonymous and elsewhere, in which the prayer asks his deity for the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And without the hope of genuine internal and external change, there would be no point to Alcoholics Anonymous, or any group endeavor toward a better future, including the ragtag group of misfits from our favorite adventure series. So, as shouty as I often am about acceptance and personal growth, especially in the face of things we really can't change, I too was raised on hero-oriented stories, and I personally cannot accept that all positive changes, fictional and non, should be internal ones. Sometimes we really can't change the world for the better, even if it is in only what feels like piddly little ways. And for as much as I trash talk the capital H hero, he is in fact one of the most likely archetypes to inspire such change. Therefore, I would politely suggest to my fellow readers and writers that it is the dose that makes the poison of either determinism or rugged individualism. That spending too much time on Story Mountain with protagonists so powerful they could break the world over their knee, or too much time on Mount Kishotenketsu, letting the world and everything in it do its best to break you over its knee, have comparable potential to harm the old psyche if we internalize them too greatly. And maybe, just maybe, it is best to look at both Kishotenketsu and the Monomyth as valuable but flawed gospels, unlike the Gospel of Annoying Orange, which is clearly perfect in every way. As always, thank you for giving these videos a shot. Earnest thanks to all the viewers who chimed in last time around and let me know that Kishotenketsu was a thing. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear me dissect more semi-sacred concepts I barely understand. Until we meet again, take it easy. Loves you. Bye.